all somewhat familiar with psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is the study of the mind and how the mind affects behavior. Sigmund Freud's ideas on the unconscious shaped this science. He theorized that behavior can be affected by unconscious thoughts and feelings. People are motivated, even driven, by unconscious desires, conflicts, needs, and fears. His theory started discussions, gained him followers, and now, psychoanalysis is so prevalent that many of its ideas are accepted as common knowledge. Concepts like people being affected unconsciously by past trauma, or psychological conflict causing strange behavior, or the idea that facing your fears helps you overcome them. These ideas are common in our culture, but we forget they mostly come from Freud. Psychoanalysis is so ingrained in our world that artists and writers often use psychoanalytic themes in their work. Take the year 2000 game by American Mcgee, Alice, for example. Alice is a journey through the title character's mind, inspired by psychoanalysis. Alice isn't just based on Freudian ideas. It's very deliberately made with Dreamwork in mind, evidenced by the repressed thoughts and fears that make up the game's wonderland. You play as Alice, who, ironically, loved Lewis Carroll's books as a girl and spent a lot of her childhood fantasizing about her own adventures there. When her family died in a house fire, she suffered horrifying survivor's guilt. The psychological damage was so thorough that even her fantasies were destroyed. 10 years after the fire, an adult Alice, now a catatonic member of the neurotics ward at the local asylum, is pulled back into her fantasies, only to discover that Wonderland is not the same as she left it. Her broken Wonderland is her broken mind, and the things that threaten to destroy it are guilt, personified as the dreaded Jabberwock.
How foolish you were to think you could overcome your guilt.
And the encroaching touch of madness, manifested as the enigmatic Red Queen.
Off with her head.
To overcome these two obstacles is Alice's goal. Overcoming them is the only way to restore Wonderland, and the only way to restore Alice's broken mind. I'm not postulating this, it's actually in the game.
You withdrew from your world after the fire because you could not bear your terrible loss. When you answered Rabbit's call, you began to emerge from your tragedy. Stay on this path, Alice. Save yourself, and you will save Wonderland.
Back to the Dreamwork thing. Freud's Dreamwork theory works like this. Thoughts and feelings our conscious selves deem unacceptable in some way are pushed back. But even though we push them away, these thoughts don't disappear. They remain active in our unconscious thoughts. When we dream, these unconscious thoughts wander back into the active mind. However, they are disguised through a process called dreamwork. Basically, Freud theorized our minds use sleep time to act out the base urges we've tucked safely away. You know, wish fulfillment. But even while asleep, our defenses are up. We don't like admitting those base urges are there when we're awake, let alone when we're trying to sleep. So the mind edits the dream, by way of the dreamwork process, until it's more acceptable. The first step of dreamwork is condensation. The mind quashes the massive crowds of dream thoughts together to make them manageable before presenting them as, I don't know, whatever this thing is.
Bill McGill at your service. Call me Larry. Or not. Have any brandy?
Part of condensation is censorship. Whatever unconscious urges the mind deems unacceptable are changed. Censorship is accomplished through displacement. These unacceptable feelings are disguised by being placed on an unrelated subject. That's right, unconscious conflicts and feelings are sneaking about in our dreams, but are also cleverly disguised you never recognize them. Lastly, the dream goes through a secondary elaboration, wherein the randomness is made into a more or less story-like dream. We assume that the mind is so ashamed of producing such a stream of nonsense it's trying to make up for it somehow. The mind works hard to disguise these unconscious thoughts because, A, we push these thoughts out of our mind for a reason. They distress us in some way, so the mind disguises the thought to make it less distressing. And B, these thoughts are abstract, so visual versions of these thoughts don't always make immediate sense. The whole of Alice is essentially one vast lucid dream, or hallucination. The game we play through is the manifest dream. The monsters, the fighting with the monsters, places made of crazy, bigger monsters, whatever this thing is, and the scariest freaking Cheshire Cat ever conceived by man. Beneath the surface is the latent dream, a laundry list of hostility, guilt, and the fears that keep Alice catatonic. Dreamwork is essential to the story because Alice can't handle her guilt and fear. That's why she's catatonic. But in Wonderland, where the Dreamwork has made her abstract problems into physical creatures, Alice finally gets to fulfill her greatest wish, which is fighting back. It's the Freudian idea that facing your suppressed feelings is the only way to overcome them. Or maybe she's just sort of violent. Everything in Wonderland, environments, allies, and enemies, are all condensed personifications of repressed fears, desires, and conflicts. Okay, not everything. Some things in dreams and games are incidental. Freud sometimes admitted even a cigar may be just a cigar. But the environments are chaotic, a little mind-screwy, and hostile, which probably reflect Alice's feelings about the world. Unstable, without the safety of parents. And hostile because she feels guilty and deserving of hostility. I also think some of the mind-screwiness, especially toward the end, have to do with Alice seeing herself as going crazy, or a deep fear of the possibility. Evidence of the deliberate use of Freud's Dreamwork by the game's creators is everywhere, but certain enemies are the best examples. One of them is the Mad Hatter. In this twisted wonderland, he is obsessed with perfection and precise time. He cruelly keeps other Wonderland creatures in cells that look an awful lot like asylum rooms and slowly turns them into automatons, one mechanical part at a time. In this way, the presence of clockwork, especially on a living thing, seems to have to do with enforced order, namely, one person forcing order and organization on another against their will, no matter how cruel the process. Since Alice lives in an asylum, where patients are strictly controlled, from the way they are to behave to what time they are to be at lunch, this may be a reflection of her feelings about the asylum environment slowly turning her into a well-behaved machine. While we're on the subject of clockwork, let's talk about the best proof that Dreamwork is a major factor in the game. This is the Jabberwock, guardian of the Red Queen's fortress, pre-final boss fight, and personification of Alice's guilt.
Selfish, misbegotten, and unnatural child. You smelled the smoke, but you were in Dreamland taking tea with your friends. You couldn't be bothered. Your room was protected and spared, while your family upstairs roasted in an inferno of incredible horror.
But also, note the clockwork theme on him as well. So far, clockwork has been related to enforced perfection, all the way down to arriving on time. It would seem to be the same here.
You've kept me waiting, Alice. Have you never heard that punctuality is a virtue?
You and my dentist's assistant have much in common.
His bizarre appearance suggests that several unconscious thoughts are condensed in him, not just guilt and enforced order, but maybe others like authority and hostility. True to Freud's Dreamwork theories, the Jabberwock is where Alice's feelings of guilt are displaced to. A giant newt dragon with fabricated wings has nothing to do with survivor's guilt, but the disguise is part of the defense mechanism. I think the Jabberwock exists because it was important for Alice that the voice of guilt be another voice, not her own. If it's something else that's accusing her, not herself like usual, she's more able to defend herself. Plus, facing and overcoming your guilt is easier if you perceive it as separate from yourself. The Red Queen is an example of Dreamwork at its most obscure. The Red Queen is the final boss of the game, the personification of madness in Alice's mind. In Freudian theory, enigmatic dream imagery, like this, are just abstract concepts trying to represent themselves visually in the mind's eye. The Red Queen is a condensation of several fears, mostly Alice's fear of going mad. The abstract nature of the fear, and her mental picture of insanity, probably created the abhorrent, nonsensical nature of the Red Queen. Censoring and displacement probably have a lot to do with this too. When Alice's mind disguised the unconscious fears represented in the Red Queen, it did its job a little too well. But two of the formative, latent dream thoughts peek through the heavy censoring. A fear of madness, as mentioned earlier, and a sense of enforced perfection, present in the Mad Hatter and the Jabberwock. Of course, there's no clockwork involved in the fight with the Red Queen, which pokes a hole in my clockwork symbolism theory, but the Red Queen verbalizes this theme.
Your interference will not be tolerated.
This realm is for grown-ups. Raw, well-ordered, ruthless, careening on the jagged edge of reality.
Self-pitying dreamers are not wanted here. They cannot survive here.
In psychoanalytic theory, we struggle with change or trauma because they don't make sense. They're events that lack order and stability. We try to make sense of them, but can't. Freud theorizes this is the cause of some neurological disorders. It seems to be suggested that Alice is beginning to go mad because she has come to feel, unconsciously, that she must promote order and stability in herself in order to make sense of her life, even though it's not possible. There will be order, even if her own mind has to be destroyed in the process. The Dreamwork used in Alice is what makes it possible for guilt to be defeated in battle, and madness destroyed at its throne. Without Freud's ideas, a game in which one travels through a wonderland that is the mind, and facing one's repressed fears in order to overcome them, would not exist. Well, it could exist, but it wouldn't be a darkly beautiful metaphor for destroyed childhood and the unconscious. It would just be some kind of platformer with weird-looking enemies and wanton destruction of floating blocks. Freud was strange, but his theories ring with truth, and that's why they're still part of our culture and a part of our art. You know, American Mcgee was annoyed with a few things in the final version of the game. The release version was less bloody, and the Cheshire Cat's in-game model is not as skeletal as he was in the concept art. Also, originally, the third face to appear in this scene was not Alice's face, but actually the face of Foucault, accompanied by the words, "Pay attention to me forever." This version was considered too scary for the game's M rating and was cut from the final product.